The silence of the locker room was heavy. Not that common silence after a defeat. That kind everyone knows. It was different. It was the type of silence that sticks to the skin like cold sweat, that makes each heartbeat sound like a distant drum. Draymond Green was alone, sitting on a wooden bench that had already seen too many glories and defeats to count. His breathing was irregular, choppy. How is it possible that a man who dedicated his entire life to a sport feels so empty? The cell phone vibrated incessantly beside him. Notification after notification. Have you ever noticed how people become brave behind a screen? Thousands of comments, perhaps tens of thousands, all saying the same thing with different words. Green lost control again. He is toxic. He does not deserve to be in the NBA. He should be banned. 3 weeks. It had been only 3 weeks since the last suspension. And here he was again, in the center of another media storm. The headline was always the same, only the details changed. Draymond Green loses his head again. As if he were only that. As if 20 years of work, of sweat, of sleepless nights perfecting each movement, as if all that could be summarized in 15 seconds of an explosive moment. But what nobody saw, what nobody ever saw, was what happened behind the scenes. To understand this story, we need to go back 3 weeks, not to the incident that everybody saw and judged, but to what happened afterward. Because great things happen when nobody is watching. And what Steph Curry did when the cameras turned off, that changes absolutely everything. The press room at Chase Center had that characteristic smell of ambition and tension. Too strong air conditioning, reheated coffee, and the almost palpable aroma of loaded questions waiting for the right moment to explode. Reporters from all over the country crowded together, cameras positioned, recorders extended like weapons. Steph Curry entered with that characteristic calm. Have you ever noticed how some people carry peace with them? It is almost like ambient temperature. When Curry enters a room, something changes in the air. But today there was something different in his eyes. A determination that went beyond basketball. The first questions were the usual ones: statistics, strategies, the next game. Curry answered with professional courtesy, but any attentive person could perceive he was waiting for something, or someone. And then it happened. A reporter from ESPN, Robert Kim, stood up in the back of the room. The silence that followed was instantaneous. Everyone knew what was coming. Kim had that reputation. The guy who asked questions that nobody wanted to hear, but everyone wanted to know the answer to. Steph, Kim's voice cut through the air like a sharp blade. You have defended Draymond Green publicly for years. Through each suspension, each controversy, each moment when the rest of the world condemns him. My question is simple. He made a calculated pause, letting tension build. How much longer are you going to keep defending the indefensible? The room froze. It is impossible not to feel the weight of a moment like this, when a question stops being just a question and becomes challenge, accusation, judgment. Curry did not avert his gaze. He did not hesitate. He did not make that diplomatic smile that athletes learn to use as a shield. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, and when he spoke, each word carried the weight of something much larger than basketball. Robert, Curry began, and there was something in his voice, a seriousness that made even the photographers stop clicking. You do not know even 10% of Draymond's story. Not even 10%. He paused, letting that echo. And when you do, When you really do, you are going to be ashamed of each word you have written. The silence in the room was no longer just absence of sound. It was presence of shock. What is most striking about this type of moment is how raw truth has a physical weight. You can feel it pressing against your chest. "Is that your answer?" Kim insisted, but there was less confidence in his voice now. Curry stood up. Naturally, this leads us to understand that when someone like Steph Curry, three-time champion, two-time MVP, one of the most respected players in history, decides that the conversation is over, it really is over. "It is the only answer you are going to have today," Curry said, and left the room without looking back. Social media exploded in seconds. Have you ever asked yourself how a phrase can change entire narratives? You do not know even 10% of the story became a worldwide trending topic in less than 15 minutes. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone had a theory. But nobody, absolutely nobody, had the truth. In the Warriors' locker room, Draymond watched the press conference on his cell phone. His hands trembled slightly. Not from anger, not from frustration, from something he had not felt in a long time. Vulnerability. Was he ready for the world to know? Would he ever be? The locker room door opened. Draymond did not need to look to know who it was. Recognizable footsteps. Unmistakable presence. "You did not need to do that," Draymond said, still looking at his cell phone. Curry sat beside him on the bench. The same bench where Draymond had spent countless hours over a decade. Victories and defeats. Championships and eliminations. A friendship forged not in easy moments, but in impossible ones. "I did need to, yes," Curry answered calmly, "because you are never going to do it for yourself. You are going to carry that alone until you break. And I am not going to let that happen." "Steph." Draymond's voice failed for a second. He cleared his throat, but the emotion was still there, thick as fog. There are things that are better left in the past. Buried. People do not need to know." "Wrong." Curry's answer was firm, but gentle. Like you speak to someone you love when you need them to hear a difficult truth. People judge what they do not understand. They always will judge. But when they understand where the pain comes from, when they understand why someone fights the way they fight, then judgment becomes compassion. Then anger becomes empathy. Draymond finally looked at his friend. His eyes were red, not from tears, not yet, but from years of holding everything in, from building walls so high that he himself could no longer climb them. "I do not know if I am strong enough for this," Draymond whispered. "You already are strong enough," Curry answered. "What you are not is alone enough to carry that. And you never were." That night, while San Francisco illuminated with millions of lights forming urban constellations, two men sat on a balcony with a view of the bay. There were no cameras. There were no reporters. Just the distant sound of traffic and waves hitting the pier. For the first time in years, perhaps the first time since they met, Draymond Green began to tell the complete story. Not the edited version. Not the version safe for public relations. The raw truth, without filters, without protections. And Steph Curry listened. Really listened. Because sometimes the greatest loyalty is not defending someone publicly. It is being present when they finally decide to stop defending themselves and just be human, vulnerable, broken, real. "Do you know where I came from?" Draymond began, and that simple question carried the weight of an entire lifetime. What happened in the hours that followed would change not only their friendship, but the way the entire world saw Draymond Green. Because great things happen when nobody is watching. But sometimes, the biggest transformations happen when we finally let someone see. And Draymond was about to let not just Curry, but the entire world see who he really was behind the armor, behind the anger, behind the headlines. But first, we need to understand where it all began. Because you cannot understand the intensity of a man without understanding the fire that forged that intensity. And the fire that forged Draymond Green, that burned in ways that most people will never experience. That same night, when the city lights blinked like fallen stars and the cold of San Francisco Bay cut through the skin, Curry did something unexpected. Without warning, without calling first, he drove to Draymond's house. Not the mansion that the world saw in magazines. That was just a facade, a symbol of success. He went to the real house, the one that Draymond kept secret, where he guarded the memories that mattered. When Draymond opened the door, his eyes were tired. Not the tiredness of a 48-minute game, but that deep tiredness that lives in the bones, that comes from carrying invisible weight for too long. "You need to let people understand why you are like this," Curry said, without even a hello, without beating around the bush. "Not for them. For you." Draymond stood still for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. And then, for the first time in a long time, he let someone in. Not just physically, emotionally. They sat in the living room, walls covered with photos that told a different story from the one ESPN narrated. Photos of a skinny boy in Saginaw, Michigan. Photos of a strong woman with a tired smile. His mother. Photos of streets that seemed imprisoned in black and white, even though they were colored. "Do you know where Saginaw is?" Draymond asked, his voice softer now, as if he were accessing a part of himself that rarely saw daylight. Curry shook his head. He knew the titles, the statistics. One of the most violent cities in the United States. One of the poorest. But knowing data is not the same as understanding reality. It is not the same as feeling. "Saginaw is not just a city," Draymond began, looking at a specific photo. Him, at maybe 12 years old, hugged with a boy the same age. Both smiling with that innocence that does not survive long in places like that. It is a test of survival. A place where you learn from an early age that the world is not interested in saving you. You save yourself, or you become a statistic. The silence that followed had texture. Heavy, dense, like fog that you can touch. Draymond continued, and it was as if dams were breaking inside him, waters held back for decades, finally finding an outlet. "My father, Wallace, worked 3 jobs. His voice trembled slightly. 3. Can you imagine that? Waking up at 4 in the morning, coming home after midnight, and the next day doing it all again. He was a school bus driver, worked in an auto parts factory, and at night he did security in a parking lot." Curry listened, and something that touches deeply is realizing that heroes do not wear only basketball uniforms. Sometimes they wear worn work uniforms, carrying the weight of entire families on their shoulders. "And my mother, Mary Babers." Draymond smiled, but it was a smile mixed with something darker, more complex. "She was the voice. The only voice that could reach me when the anger of the streets began to pull me in." "Anger of the streets?" Curry asked gently. Draymond stood up, walked to the window. Outside, San Francisco shone safe and illuminated. But his eyes were seeing another city, another time. When you grow up seeing your friends choose between gangs because it is the only form of protection they know, when you see mothers crying on sidewalks because they lost sons before they turned 15, when you realize that society has already decided that you are not worth anything before you even have a chance to prove otherwise. He paused, breathing more deeply now. Anger is not a choice. It is a survival tool. It is the only thing that keeps you alive when everything around you is trying to kill you. It is impossible not to feel the weight of these words. How is it possible that a boy in these conditions not just survives, but thrives? But then you look at Draymond, at the intensity that the world criticizes, and you realize that is not a defect. It is a battle scar. It is proof of survival. My mother used to say one thing, Draymond continued, going back to sit, but now closer, more present. Draymond, anger can be fuel, or it can be poison. You choose. She repeated that like a mantra. Every day, especially on bad days. And you chose fuel, Curry observed. I tried. The honesty in Draymond's voice was cutting. I swear I tried. Each time I stepped on the court, each time someone said I was too short, too slow, did not have enough talent, I turned that into fire, into determination, into proof. He looked directly at Curry now, and there were tears forming, but he did not let them fall. Not yet. But sometimes, Steph, sometimes I get confused. Sometimes the line between fuel and poison gets so thin that I do not know anymore which side I am on. And when I explode on the court, when I lose control, it is not because I am bad. It is not because I do not care. It is because his voice failed. It is because you are still fighting, Curry completed with deep understanding. You never stopped fighting. Draymond nodded, and a tear finally escaped. Just one. But it carried the weight of years. How many times in life do you really know someone? Not the public version, not the persona, but the person behind all of that? Curry was having that moment now, and he also felt something changing inside him. I never told you about my father, Curry said suddenly. Draymond looked surprised. Everyone knew Del Curry, legendary NBA player, exceptional shooter, brilliant career. Not like this, Curry clarified. Growing up as Del Curry's son was complex. Each time I stepped on a court, I was not Steph. I was Del's son. Each mistake I made was amplified. Each success was minimized. Of course, it is genetic. You understand? Draymond shook his head slowly. Is it not incredible how different pains can create unexpected bridges? I spent years trying to prove that I was more than a surname, Curry continued. And the pressure. Man, the pressure of never being able to fail because you represent not just yourself, but an entire lineage that burns from the inside out. But you always seemed so, at peace, Draymond observed. Because I learned to channel differently, Curry explained. But do not fool yourself. The anger was there. The frustration was there. I just had different structures, different supports, and even so there were days that almost broke me. Something that naturally leads us to understand is that trauma has no hierarchy. Pain is not competition. Two men from completely different worlds, with completely different struggles, finding common ground in shared humanity. But then, Draymond revealed something that changed the entire tone of the conversation. Something he had never told publicly. Something that explained not just his intensity, but his fierce loyalty, his need to protect, his dread of silence. I was 14 years old. he began, and the voice was already different, more fragile, more young, as if he were back at that age. My best friend, Terrell, we were inseparable. He lived 3 houses below mine. We played ball together every day. We had plans, you know? We were going to get out of Saginaw together. NBA, college, anything. But together. Curry said nothing, just listened, because there are moments where the greatest empathy is attentive silence. It was a Tuesday, Draymond continued, and it was as if he were reliving each second. I was at home, doing homework. 3 blocks below my house there was a shooting. Rival gangs, territories, all that meaningless trash that destroys lives for nothing. He paused, breathed deeply, struggled to continue. Terrell was coming back from the store. Wrong place, wrong time. He was not even involved. He was 14 years old, man. 14. And he died on the sidewalk 3 blocks from my house because his zip code was wrong. The pain in that room was palpable, thick, suffocating. I went to the hospital, Draymond continued, tears flowing freely now. I saw his mother, the desperation in her eyes, and I made a promise. Right there, in that cold hospital corridor that smelled like disinfectant and desperation, I promised. Promised what? Curry asked softly. That I would never be silent. Draymond looked directly at Curry, and there was fire in his eyes now. Not anger, but determination forged in tragedy. That I would never be passive. That I would never let anyone intimidate me or intimidate those I love. That if I had a voice, I would use it. That if I had strength, I would use it. That I would never, never let anyone I care about feel that they are alone in a fight. The silence that followed was sacred. It is impossible not to feel the weight of a promise made over such pain. But maybe, Draymond began, his voice breaking, maybe I confused intensity with aggression. Maybe I let that pain become poison. Maybe the same thing that saved me from being another statistic in Saginaw is the same thing that is destroying me now. Curry moved closer, placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. Or maybe, he said calmly, you just need to learn that there is more than one way to honor that promise. That protecting does not mean always fighting. That using your voice does not mean always screaming. It was then that Draymond did something surprising. He stood up, went to his office, and came back with an envelope. Not just any envelope. It was worn on the edges, clearly opened and closed many times. This here, he said, holding the envelope as if it were a sacred relic, is what keeps me awake at night. He opened it carefully and pulled out a stack of letters. Crumpled paper, child's, writing, some with drawings in the margins. They are from Saginaw, Draymond explained, from children who see me as, I do not know, as hope, as proof that you can get out of there? He laughed bitterly. They write to me asking for advice. How to deal with violence in schools. How to resist gang pressure. How to believe in the future when everything around screams that there is no future. He handed one of the letters to Curry. Irregular handwriting, but powerful words. Mr. Draymond, my name is Tommy, and I am 12 years old. My older brother joined a gang last week. He says he had no choice. I will have to choose soon, too. But I saw you on TV fighting for your team, and I thought, if he can fight like that, maybe I can fight differently. Tell me how. Please tell me how. Curry read the letter 2 times, 3 times. Each word weighed like a brick. There are dozens like this, Draymond whispered. Dozens, Steph. And each time I explode on TV, each time I lose control, each time I see my name in headlines for the wrong reasons, I think about them, about these children, and I realize he did not finish the sentence, but he did not need to. They do not need someone who explodes, Curry completed. They need someone who evolved. Draymond nodded, the weight of that crushing. And I do not know if I am that guy. I do not know if I know how to be that guy. The night was almost over. San Francisco Bay was darker now, the city lights diminishing as people slept, unaware of the transformation happening in that room. But Curry was not done. He also had something to reveal, something that would change the direction of this entire story. I have a proposal, he said, and there was determination in his voice now. But I need you to trust me. Completely. Draymond looked cautious. What kind of proposal? An interview, Curry answered. Us two. Live. Without a script. We talk about all of this. About Saginaw. About Terrell. About those letters. About mental health. About trauma. About the thin line between strength and self-destruction. Have you gone crazy? Draymond stood up immediately. That would be career suicide. The media would distort everything, use it against me, Or, Curry interrupted calmly, for the first time, you control the narrative. For the first time, they hear the complete story. Not pieces, not headlines. The truth. Draymond shook his head. Steph, you do not understand. Vulnerability is not seen as strength in my world. It is seen as weakness, and weakness kills you. That, Curry said firmly, standing up to be at the same height as his friend, is exactly the type of mentality that is killing you now. Not gangs, not violence, but this idea that you need to be impenetrable, that showing humanity is losing. What is most striking about this type of confrontation is when love disguises itself as challenge. Curry was not attacking Draymond. He was trying to save him, the only way he knew how. I do not know if I am strong enough for this, Draymond admitted again. But now there was something different in the tone. It was not just fear. It was consideration. You have spent your whole life fighting, Curry said, echoing words he had already said, but now with complete context. You fought to survive in Saginaw. You fought to make it to the NBA. You fought for each title, each victory, each moment of recognition. You know how to fight better than anyone I know. He paused, letting the silence emphasize what would come next. Now it is time to heal. And healing begins with truth. Healing begins when you stop fighting alone and let people in. Not to save you. You do not need to be saved. But to remind you that you are more than your worst moments, that you are more than the headlines, that you are human, complex, flawed, and still worthy. Great things happen when nobody is watching, but sometimes the biggest things happen when we finally allow everyone to see. Draymond looked at the letters on the table, at the photo of him with Terrell, at Curry standing in front of him, offering not judgment, but partnership. And for the first time in a long time, Draymond considered a frightening possibility. What if vulnerability was not weakness? What if truth was not surrender? What if the best way to honor that promise made so many years ago was not to fight harder, but to heal deeper? If we do this, Draymond said slowly, it cannot be halfway. It has to be everything. The complete story. Curry smiled. Not that commercial smile, but something more real. more profound. The complete story, he agreed. And let it be the world that learns to deal with the complete truth. What neither of them knew at that moment was that the universe was about to test that decision in ways that even in their worst nightmares they could not imagine. Because when you decide to be vulnerable publicly, when you decide that you are going to show the whole truth, get ready. Because the world has cruel ways of transforming honesty into a weapon. And the storm that was about to come would make everything up to now seem like a gentle summer breeze. The next few days were a whirlwind. Curry and Draymond worked with a small trusted team to structure the interview. It would not be with an outside reporter. That was crucial. It would be between the two of them, mediated by an independent journalist known for integrity, Sarah Mitchell, who had a reputation for going deep without sensationalism. But when the news leaked that Draymond Green and Steph Curry would do a live interview, no script, no limits, the reaction was complex. The Warriors' public relations team went into instant panic. The communications manager, James Wilson, called Curry 10 times in 1 hour. When he finally managed to speak, his voice was tense, like a rope about to snap. Steph, with all respect, and you know how much I admire you, but this is insanity. You are risking not just Draymond's image, but yours too, and the franchise's, and possibly the entire locker room. Curry was sitting at home, looking out the window while he listened. His calmness was almost supernatural. How is it possible for someone to maintain serenity when everyone around them is burning? James, he answered gently, I heard your concerns. I note them. And even so, we are going to do it. On the other end of the line, silence. Then Wilson tried again. Think about the consequences. Think about the sponsors. Under Armour is already nervous. If this blows up the wrong way, if it blows up, Curry interrupted, but still maintaining a respectful tone. At least it is going to blow up with truth. And I sleep better with uncomfortable truth than with comfortable lies. Is it not incredible how some decisions reveal character? Curry was not being reckless. He was being intentional. There is an enormous difference. Meanwhile, Draymond's agent, a man named Daniel Patel, was having his own collapse. Draymond, he said, sitting in Draymond's office, papers spread across the table showing sponsorship contracts, clauses, numbers. Do you have any idea what is at stake here? We spent years rebuilding your image after each incident. And now you want… What? Open old wounds? Give ammunition to the critics? Draymond was quieter than normal, but it was not the quietness of someone who had doubt. It was the quietness of someone who was certain and was just waiting for the storm to pass. They already have the ammunition, Dan, Draymond finally answered. They always have. The difference is that now I am going to give them the context, the complete story, not just the pieces that sell headlines. But I already decided. The firmness in Draymond's voice left no room for negotiation. You can work with me, or get out of the way. But this is going to happen. Patel looked at the man in front of him. 10 years of representation. 10 years of putting out fires, doing damage control, spinning narratives. And now, for the first time, his client was choosing the harder path, not out of stubbornness, but because of something Patel had never seen in him before. Hope for transformation. Okay, Patel finally conceded, sighing deeply. But for God's sake, be honest and be human, not defensive, not justifying, just real. Draymond nodded. Real is the only thing I can be now. The date was set. 2 weeks from then. Neutral location, not Chase Center, which carried associations with basketball and competition. but a studio in Oakland, the neighboring city that had its own scars and resilience. How many times in life do you make a decision that you know has no going back, that you know is going to change everything, regardless of the outcome? Draymond began to prepare emotionally. He revisited memories that he had buried. He talked to his mother, Mary, who cried but supported him completely. "That promise you made about Terrell," she said through tears, "it was not about being perfect, baby. It was about being present. And you have been. Now it is time to show that." Curry also prepared himself, but differently. He studied trauma, PTSD, the way violent environments shape young brains. He talked to psychologists, to social workers who worked in communities like Saginaw. He did not just want to be a friend in that interview. He wanted to be a bridge between Draymond's world and the world that judged him without understanding. Have you ever noticed how preparation reveals intention? Curry was preparing not for performance, but for partnership. And then, 7 days before the interview, it happened. It was a normal Warriors training session. Routine, exercises, everything flowing until a discussion started between Draymond and a young player on the team, Marcus Williams, only 22 years old, second year in the NBA. Nobody knows exactly what started it, but witnesses said the discussion escalated quickly. Raised voices, Draymond pointing his finger in Marcus's face, Marcus shouting back, other players having to step in. And, as always happens in the digital age, someone filmed it. A 10-second clip. Horrible quality, partial angle. But it showed enough. Draymond apparently aggressively confronting a much younger player. The video leaked in less than 2 hours. Social media did not just explode. It became a war zone. And that is why Green is toxic. Veteran bullying. Unacceptable. Will Curry really defend this too? Cancel the interview. That is the complete story we need. The critics who had stayed quiet after Curry's words at the press conference, they came back with vengeance. It is impossible not to feel how the world loves narratives of fall. How redemption is interesting, but destruction sells more. The Warriors' office called an emergency meeting. Draymond, Curry, the coach, the executives, all gathered in a tense room where the walls seemed to be closing in. "The interview needs to be canceled," said the general manager, Christopher Lee, without beating around the bush. "Immediately." This proves exactly what the critics say, that he is irrecoverable. No, Curry interrupted. Not loud, not aggressive, but absolute. Lee looked shocked. "Steph, be reasonable." "I am reasonable," Curry answered. "You saw 10 seconds. 10. And you have already judged, condemned, and sentenced. Is that not exactly what we are trying to change?" "But the timing." "The timing." Draymond spoke for the first time. Voice hoarse from contained emotion. "Is perfect. Because now you are going to see what really happened. Not the edited version. The complete truth." There was confusion in the room. What did he mean? 3 hours later, Marcus Williams, the young player, posted a video on his social media. Not the 10-second clip. A 5-minute video filmed by himself. Eyes red, voice emotional. "I need to say something," Marcus began, and you could hear him struggling to maintain composure. "You saw a clip today of me and Draymond, and I know what you think. I know what the headlines say, but you do not know anything." He paused, wiped his eyes. 2 weeks ago, I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. I had people, wrong people, pushing me to leave the team, saying I was not being valued, saying I deserved more, saying I should demand a trade cause drama, basically throw my career and my relationships away. You can perceive that when someone speaks with this level of vulnerability, there is no way not to pay attention. And I was considering it, Marcus continued. Seriously, I was about to mess everything up, because I was 22 years old and did not know how to tell good advice from manipulation. He looked directly at the camera now. Draymond found out. I do not know how, but he found out. And that discussion you saw? It was not him attacking me. It was him saving me. Was he being hard? Yes. Was it intense? Absolutely. But he was literally waking me up before I destroyed my life. Tears flowing freely now. After the cameras, after everyone left, he sat with me for 3 hours. 3 hours. He told me about his own choices, his own mistakes. He showed me how to think long-term. He connected me with mentors. He saved me, man. He saved me. Marcus wiped his face with his shirt. So, yes, Draymond Green is intense. Yes, he is confrontational. But you know what else he is? He is loyal. He cares. He uses that intensity to protect, not to destroy. And if you cannot see that, if you can only see 10 seconds of a clip without context, then you are part of the problem. The video ended, and something extraordinary happened. Other players began to share, not just from the Warriors, from all over the league. Story after story of Draymond mentoring in silence, of Draymond donating anonymously, of Draymond being first to arrive and last to leave, of Draymond protecting young players from the traps of fame. Veteran player Joshua Miller, who had played against Draymond for years, posted, "We competed fiercely on the court. But when my son was sick and I needed to be away, guess who called every day? Who sent resources, connected with doctors, made sure my family had everything? Draymond Green. No cameras, no publicity, just humanity." The narrative was not exactly turning, but becoming more complex, becoming three-dimensional. Naturally, this leads us to understand that people are not headlines. They are multiplicities. They are contradictions. They are humans. But even with this wave of support, the real test was still to come. Because the interview was scheduled. And now, with all this renewed attention, with polarization even more intense, with opinions even more divided, the stakes could not be higher. 3 days before the interview, Curry and Draymond met again. Not to rehearse. They had agreed not to rehearse anything, but to make sure they were really ready. "Dooley too, you still want to do this?" Curry asked. Draymond looked at his friend, and for the first time in this whole journey, he smiled. Not the competitive smile he used on the court, but something softer, more hopeful. "Great things happen when nobody is watching," he said, echoing the phrase that had become his personal mantra. But sometimes great things also need to happen when everybody is watching. Because that is how you change culture. That is how you transform narratives. That is how you break cycles. He paused, and there was something new in his eyes now. Not just determination, but peace. "I have spent my whole life fighting alone," Draymond continued, "defending alone, carrying alone. And look where that has brought me. Suspended, criticized, misunderstood. Maybe it is time to try the way you have been saying. Together. Vulnerable. Honest." Curry placed his hand on his friend's shoulder. "It is not going to be easy. People are going to distort words. They are going to look for reasons to criticize. They are going to—" "I know," Draymond interrupted. But for the first time, I do not care what they are going to do. I care about what I need to do, and I need to honor that promise I made so many years ago. Not by fighting harder, but by healing deeper, and letting other people see that it is possible. The silence that followed was sacred. Two warriors, not of physical battles, but of emotional, psychological, spiritual battles, ready to enter the greatest arena of all, raw, public truth. The night before the interview, Draymond did something he had not done in years. He went back to Saginaw. He did not post on social media. He did not tell anyone. He just drove through the streets that shaped him, past the house where he grew up, stopped on the sidewalk where Terrell had fallen so many years before. And there, under a blinking streetlight on a street that the world had forgotten, Draymond Green made a new promise. I am going to honor you the right way this time, T, he whispered to the night. Not just by fighting, but by showing that you can get out of here carrying the pain, but not being defined by it. That you can be strong and vulnerable, intense and compassionate. That you can break the cycle. The cold wind from Michigan blew, and for a moment, Draymond swore he could hear his lost friends laugh. Approval, permission, freedom. He went back to the car and drove back to California. For the interview, that would change everything. For the moment when the entire world would finally see not the armor, not the controversy, not the headlines, but the man, complete, broken, scarred, human. And in less than 24 hours, 3 million people would watch live as Draymond Green did the most courageous thing he had ever done. Not win a championship, but admit that he was still learning to win against himself. The studio in Oakland was different from what is normally seen in athlete interviews. No blinding lights, no audience. Just 3 chairs in a semicircle, soft and warm lighting, and silence that carried the weight of expectation. Sarah Mitchell arrived first. Veteran journalist of 48 years, she had that presence that transmitted both competence and compassion. She had covered war stories, humanitarian crises, collective trauma. If anyone could hold space for this conversation, it was her. Curry arrived next, dressed simply, jeans and a white shirt. Nothing with ostentatious branding, nothing with superstar posture. Just Steph, just human. And then Draymond walked in. You can perceive that sometimes courage does not have a heroic appearance. It is not shining armor or imposing posture. Sometimes courage looks like a man with slightly fallen shoulders, tired but determined eyes, hands trembling slightly as he sits. 3 million live views, the producer whispered to Sarah. And rising. 3 million people. 3 million judgments waiting to happen. 3 million opinions, already formed waiting for confirmation or challenge. Sarah looked at the 2 men in front of her. Are you ready? She asked gently. Draymond looked at Curry. Curry nodded imperceptibly. And then Draymond, for perhaps the first time ever, said something he rarely admitted. No. But we are going to do it anyway. The interview began simply. Sarah did not go directly into the controversy. She started with the human. Draymond, she said, voice warm but direct, when you wake up in the morning, before you are an NBA player, before you are a public figure, before anything else, who are you? The question caught Draymond off guard, not because it was difficult, but because it was too simple. And simple things are sometimes the most impossible to answer. He sat in silence for a moment that seemed like eternity. You could hear his breathing through the microphone. Heavy, struggling. "I am," he began, then stopped. He tried again. "I am someone who is trying to be better than the place where I came from said I would be, trying to honor the people who died so I could live, trying to find peace in the middle of a war that has lived inside me since I have memory." Tears were already forming, but he continued. "I am the son of a mother who worked until her bones ached to give me a chance. I am the grandson of people who survived things that I cannot even imagine. I am the friend of a boy who never got to be a man. And I am someone who confused survival with existence for too long." Sarah nodded, letting the silence breathe. "Is it not incredible how silence sometimes speaks louder than words?" "Steph," she turned to Curry, "you have defended Draymond publicly, consistently, often alone. Why?" Curry looked at the friend beside him before answering. There was something in the way he looked. Not pity, not obligation, but genuine recognition of equal to equal. "Because I see what many people refuse to see," Curry began. "I see a man who survived things that destroy most people. I see loyalty so fierce that sometimes it looks like anger. I see pain so deep that it had to transform into strength, or it would have become destruction." He paused, choosing words carefully. "But beyond that, I see a mirror, not of circumstances. Our lives were completely different, but of the weight, the pressure of representing more than just yourself, of carrying expectations so heavy that they crush, of having to be perfect when you are just human. How many times in life do you witness a moment where masks fall completely, where pretense evaporates, and only raw, naked, vulnerable truth remains?" Sarah, sensing the moment, went deeper. "Draymond, there is criticism that you are aggressive, explosive, impossible to control. What do you say to that?" Draymond breathed deeply. This was the question, the one he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his head, the one everyone was waiting for. "I say that they are right." Silence in the studio was absolute. 3 million people held their breath simultaneously. "I am explosive," Draymond continued, his voice becoming firmer now. "I cross lines. I speak when I should listen. I react when I should breathe. All of that is true." He looked directly at the camera now. "But here is the part they do not want to hear. I am not my worst moment. You are not your worst moment. Nobody is. We are complex. We are the product of each untreated trauma, each unhealed wound, each promise we made to survive, even when those promises eventually started to hurt us." Tears flowing freely now. "I grew up in a place where kindness was seen as weakness, where vulnerability killed you, literally. So I learned to be hard. I learned to fight first, ask questions later. I learned that intensity was armor, and if I took off that armor, I would die." He wiped his eyes, but did not look away. "And you know what is crazy? That intensity brought me here, made me a champion, made me an Eton all-star player, gave me everything I have, but also it cost me peace. It cost me relationships. It cost me sleep. It cost me the chance to be just human." Sarah let that breathe for a moment before continuing. "You mentioned untreated trauma. Can you elaborate?" And then, live for 3 million people, Draymond told the complete story of Terrell. Not the edited version. The raw truth. The shooting. The hospital. The promise. The weight of carrying that for decades. "I was 14 years old," he said, his voice breaking, "and I promised that I would never be silent, that I would never let anyone I love feel that they are alone. But nobody taught me the difference between protecting and attacking, between using a voice and screaming, between productive intensity and destructive intensity. Curry, sitting beside him, had his own tears rolling now, because he was hearing not just the story of a friend, but the story of millions of men, especially black men, who grew up in environments where vulnerability was a luxury not allowed, where strength had to be performed constantly, where admitting pain was surrender. And the children, Sarah continued gently. I understand that you receive letters? Draymond nodded, pulling the crumpled envelope from his pocket. That same envelope. There is one here, he said, his hands trembling as he held the paper. From a boy named Jake from Saginaw. He is 12 years old. He wrote, Mr. Draymond, my friend was killed last week. I do not know what to do with the anger. Help me. His voice broke completely. And do you see? I cannot help him if I do not help myself first. I cannot teach him how to channel anger if I am still letting my anger control me. I cannot be a model if I am still broken the same way. It was then that Curry spoke, not to Sarah, but directly to Draymond, to the friend, to the brother. But that is the thing, D, he said gently. You do not need to be completely healed to help. You just need to be honestly trying. And this honesty, this vulnerability you are showing right now, that helps more than any pretense of perfection ever could. He turned to the camera. We live in a culture that demands instant perfection, that wants people to change completely overnight or be canceled forever. But that is not how healing works. That is not how growth happens. It is a process. It is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It is daily, conscious, intentional work. Curry looked back at Draymond. And my brother here? He is doing the work. Not always perfectly, not always visibly, but consistently. And that deserves to be recognized. The interview continued for another 30 minutes. They talked about toxic masculinity in sports, about how media amplifies negative moments while ignoring positive transformation, about mental health in the Black community, about the weight of being first of the family in college, first to reach a certain level, and the loneliness that comes with it. Sarah asked a question that few would have the courage to ask. Draymond, if you could speak to that 14-year-old boy in Saginaw on the day Terrell died, what would you say? Draymond was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, each word carried the weight of decades. I would say that it is not your fault, that surviving does not mean you failed him, that intensity can be a gift, but it needs wise channeling, that true strength includes knowing when to lower your guard, that the best way to honor those we lose is not to never break, but to learn to heal publicly, so others see that it is possible. He looked directly at the camera, as if he could see through it all the way to Saginaw, to those children, to Jake waiting for an answer. And I would say that great things happen when nobody is watching, yes. But sometimes the biggest things happen when you let everyone see who you really are. The beautiful parts and the ugly parts. The victories and the wounds. Because that is how you change narratives. That is how you break cycles. That is how you transform pain into purpose. When the interview ended, there was initial silence on social media. Not from indifference, but from processing. From people really thinking instead of just reacting. And then, slowly, something began to change. Comments started to appear, not from celebrities, but from ordinary people. Parents from Saginaw, teachers from Oakland, social workers from Chicago, all sharing their own stories of trauma, of misguided intensity, of journeys from survival to healing. One particular comment went viral, from an anonymous user. "I judged Draymond Green for years. Today I realized I was judging in him things that I hate in myself. The anger, the difficulty with vulnerability, the fear of admitting that I need help. Thank you for having the courage that I still do not have." In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened in the NBA ecosystem. Not superficial change, but true cultural transformation. Players began to speak openly about mental health. The player union launched an expanded psychological support program. Teams began to bring in therapists specialized in trauma as an essential part of the staff. Draymond kept his intensity on the court. That was part of him. It was his gift. But now there was awareness. When he felt an explosion coming, he had tools. It did not always work perfectly, but it was working better. He started a foundation in Saginaw called Terrell's Promise, focused on helping at-risk youth channel anger into purpose, not through platitudes, but through real therapy, consistent mentoring, tangible opportunities. Jake, the 12-year-old boy who had written about losing his friend, was one of the first participants. Months later, he wrote another letter. "Mr. Draymond, thank you for showing that it is okay to not be okay. Thank you for showing that real men cry. Thank you for saving me, like someone tried to save you." 3 months after the interview, there was a particularly intense game against a conference rival. In the second quarter, Draymond made a hard foul. Too hard. The type that normally would result in an explosion, in a flagrant, in headlines. The entire gym fell silent. What would happen? Draymond stopped. He closed his eyes. You could see him practicing breathing techniques he had learned in therapy. 5 seconds that seemed like 5 minutes. And then he opened. His eyes walked to the player he had knocked down and extended his hand to help him up. "Sorry, man," he said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "Too hard. My bad." The other player, Ryan Johnson, looked shocked for a moment. Then he accepted the hand, stood up, and said something back that the microphones did not clearly catch. But after the game, Ryan revealed to reporters, he said he is working on being better, that he still slips, but he is trying, and that he hopes I understand because everyone deserves space to grow. Ryan paused, emotional. And you know what? That is real growth. Not pretending that you are perfect, but admitting when you mess up and genuinely trying to improve. That is what I respect. Is it not incredible how real transformation is not dramatic? It is not an instant turnaround, not a movie moment. It is 1,000 small choices, day after day, moment after moment, of choosing differently, of choosing better, of choosing healing, over habit. At the end of that season, Draymond sat down for another interview. This time, not with crisis precipitating, just a check-in. How was he? How did the journey continue? "I still struggle," he admitted honestly. "There are days when intensity becomes aggression. There are days when pain becomes poison. But now I have tools. I have support. I have people like Steph who remind me that I am more than my worst moments." "And those children in Saginaw?" the interviewer asked. "What? Do you want them to know?" Draymond smiled. Not the competitive smile, but something deeper, more real. I want them to know that pain is not destiny, that trauma is not identity, that you can come from where they come from and still choose healing. It is not going to be easy. It is not going to be fast. And it is not going to be perfect. But it is going to be possible. Because if I can, anyone can. And on one specific night, 6 months after that interview that changed everything, Draymond went back to Saginaw, not for a charity event with cameras, but for a simple dinner at Jake's house, the 12-year-old boy. They sat at a worn table, eating food made by Jake's grandmother. They talked about basketball, about school, about life. And in a quiet moment, Jake asked a question. "Do you still think about your friend? About Terrell?" Draymond nodded. "Every day." "Do you think he would be proud?" Draymond considered honestly. "I think that he would be proud not because I became a champion or famous, but because I finally learned that honoring someone does not mean never breaking. It means showing that it is possible to break and then heal, that it is possible to be strong and vulnerable, that it is possible to come from what we came from and choose differently." Jake nodded, processing, and then he said something that Draymond would never forget. "You know what my friend told me before he died?" He said, "Jake, do not let anger consume you. Use it to build something." I did not know what he meant. But now I think I do. Draymond drove back to California that night with a heart lighter than it had been in years, because, for the first time, he understood that redemption is not about never making mistakes. It is about learning from mistakes. It is not about being perfect. It is about being honest. And while he drove down the dark road, with lights blinking like fallen stars, he repeated to himself that phrase that had become more than a mantra. It had become a lived truth. Great things happen when nobody is watching. But sometimes, the biggest things happen when you let everyone see who you really are. Because in the end, that is the story the world needed to hear. Not of perfection, but of progress. Not of a flawless hero, but of a broken human choosing to heal publicly so others see that it is possible. Steph Curry was right that day at the press conference. The world did not know even 10% of Draymond Green's story. And now that it did, many would still criticize. Some would never change their minds. And that was okay. Because transformation is not about changing everyone's minds. It is about changing enough minds so that Jake in Saginaw and 1,000 other Jakes in 1,000 other Saginaws see a mirror not of impossible perfection, but of possible humanity. It is about breaking cycles. It is about transforming pain into purpose. It is about understanding that judgment without context is cruelty, but context without accountability is excuse. And true redemption lives in the intersection of both. Draymond Green would never be perfect, but he was being real. And sometimes, real is more powerful than perfect ever could be. Because real gives permission. Real gives hope. Real says, you can too. And in the end, is that not what we all need to hear? Before judging Draymond Green, you needed to hear what Steph Curry said about him. And more importantly, you needed to hear what Draymond was finally brave enough to say about himself. That changes everything.